Is it possible to cure type 2 diabetes? Some people say it's impossible, other people are doing it. My name is Andreas Enfeldt from dietdoctor.com, and my guest today is Dr. Jay Wortman. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I know we've done an interview before, and I know you have a fascinating story. How did you become interested in diet and lifestyle and health? How did it start for you?
I'm a medical doctor, and I practiced clinical medicine for a while, and I was quite familiar with diabetes at the time. And then I got working in public health administration and then eventually research. But along the way, I wasn't taking very good care of myself. I gained weight and so on. And I also had a family history of diabetes. So there's a lot of diabetes in my mother's side of the family. My grandparents, my mother, some of my siblings, some of my mother's siblings had diabetes. So I had a strong family history. And you would think as a doctor, you would understand these risks and take better care, but maybe because of the stress of my job, that might be one of my excuses. I let myself develop type 2 diabetes. And I think I was in denial, because when I realized that I had type 2 diabetes, I tested myself and figured it out. I had all the symptoms. I had blurred vision, I was tired, I was overweight, I was getting up in the night to go to the bathroom, I was thirsty all the time. I had all the symptoms before it finally dawned on me that I probably had type 2 diabetes, and then I tested, and of course my blood sugar was very high.
And so you're a doctor and you got this disease yourself. How did that feel? How did you react to that?
Even though it was obviously developing over time and everything, when it finally dawned on me, it was very shocking. I felt quite stunned that how could I be so stupid, and how could I not have noticed, and why did it take me so long to figure it out? But probably the biggest thing that upset me was that I had a young son. He was 2 years old, my first child. I was 52 at the time, and I know too much about diabetes. I know about the life expectancy is shorter, risk of complications, high risk of cardiovascular disease. You know too much as a doctor, and all these thoughts were in my mind that, I wasn't going to live long enough to see my young son grow up. I was having very dark thoughts about it. And what happened was, because I had not been doing clinical practice for a while, I felt that I should read up a bit, get up to date on diabetes treatment, and essentially figure out which drug I should be on. And I needed some time to do that. And I knew I didn't want my blood sugar to be too high during this time while I was, trying to figure out what to do. So I decided that I would stop eating carbohydrates, because I knew carbohydrates makes your blood sugar go up. But during my training and during my practice, it had never occurred to me that you would eliminate diabetes as a therapy for diabetes. That you would eliminate carbohydrates as a therapy for diabetes. It never occurred to me that that was a therapy.
So that's an advice you never gave your patients? Or
I'd never been taught that. The guidelines don't say that. You don't treat patients that way. It was not something that ever occurred to me.
But still you did it for yourself.
And I didn't do it as a therapy. I did it just to buy some time. I didn't want my blood sugar to go too high until I figured out which drug to take.
So what happened when you did that?
As soon as I stopped eating carbohydrates, my blood sugar normalized. I felt better. My symptoms all went away, and I started losing about 1 pound of weight a day.
That's very much. That's a lot, huh?
It was, yeah. It surprised me. Yes. I've always been taught that you shouldn't lose weight too rapidly. And that's probably because unless you do a low carb diet, you can't.
Yeah. So when you say you stopped eating carbohydrates, what are the specific foods that you quit eating?
I stopped eating all starchy foods, pasta, potatoes, rice, bread, and anything that was sweet, all sugar-containing foods, including fruit. I didn't eat fruit.
So what did you eat?
I ate meats and fish and poultry and dairy fats, butter, cream, cheese, and lots of non-starchy vegetables.
Okay. So you felt better immediately, you say, and you lost a lot of weight.
Within a few days, all those symptoms were gone, and my sense of well-being had improved. I felt better. I had more energy. My sense of doom and gloom started to go away. Mm-hmm.
But you were kind of imagining this as a short-term fix, or to get ready for to read up on the disease and all the drugs and so on. But that's not really how it turned out.
That's not how it turned out. I got so well within a few days that I got curious about this and why, trying to understand why was this working so well, and I'd never learned about it. I'd never been taught about this. And so I started looking a little bit into the literature to see if there was any research in this area. And right around that time, Eric Westman published his first study on the Atkins diet. It was in 2002. And it was a very simple study. He put a group of men on a low-carb diet, and they got better, and things improved, and their lipids improved, and so on. And I actually contacted Eric, tracked him down and talked to him at the time. But the other thing that happened was, my wife is a worrier, right? She worries about everything. So I didn't tell her that I discovered I had diabetes.
You didn't?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't tell her, and because I didn't want her to worry, right? But of course, then she noticed that I wasn't eating any carbohydrates. Yeah, it's hard to hide that from her at the dinner table. So within a few days, I said, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I did. And she said, well, you're on the Atkins diet, dummy. She knew more about the Atkins diet at that point than I did.
So she could tell you how to do it, huh?
She had a book, she had an Atkins book somewhere, and she brought it out. Yeah. And I'd never looked at that before. And she brought it out, and I looked at it, and sure enough, that's what I was doing. I was doing an Atkins diet. I was doing the induction part of the Atkins diet. So I read that, and then I looked around in the literature, and it encouraged me to keep doing it. And of course, at that time, the Atkins book wasn't specifically recommending this for diabetes. There was a book written later by Mary Vernon and Jackie Eberstein, Atkins for Diabetes, but at the time it was just about weight loss. But that's exactly what I was doing.
Yeah. So you got started doing this, and that's like 11 years ago now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What has happened since then?
I began to understand it better. I actually began, it changed my career. I got really interested in it and started doing research in that area, and got to know many of the people that were doing the research in the States, people you've interviewed, people like Steve Finney and Jeff Volek and others, and was fortunate in terms of being able to get in a position to do some research myself. But for myself personally, I became, as time passed, I became more and more convinced that this was the right diet for me and the right diet to eliminate my diabetes problem. It went away.
Did you need any medication?
I never took any medication.
Never, huh?
And the other thing was my blood pressure had been getting high, and I was kind of in denial. I was trying to manage that without medication, and I wasn't doing particularly well, but my blood pressure got better. I checked my lipids. I remember when the first time I checked my lipids, I'd been enjoying, butter and, cream, and I learned how to make my own ice cream, low-carb ice cream made with egg yolks and cream, all these fatty, saturated fats. And after about 3 or 4 months, I thought, well, I better check my lipids. I've been eating all this stuff I've been told not to eat. I better check my lipids. And I thought, well, the party's over, I can't keep eating all this rich, fatty food, obviously. And I checked my lipids, and they were great. It's
okay.
Like, wow.
So what did you think then? I mean,
well,
that's not what we've been taught, right?
No, it went completely against what I was taught. But my lipids were great. And again, that was another surprise to me, because I'd been doing this for a while at that point, a few months, and everything was great, and I fully expected my lipid profile would be bad, and it wasn't. Yeah.
So, I mean, 11 years later, have you had any problems? Has it,
no.
Are you still on the same kind of diet?
More than ever. I'm on a very low-carb diet throughout that
no
period.
bread, no pasta, nothing, no sweets?
No starches, no sweets. I might eat a handful of berries once in a while. Or
so how's your blood sugar now?
Normal. I get normal, high normal. I still have insulin resistance, so my fasting blood sugar will be 5.3, 5.5. Same with my
that's good.
Yeah, same with my hemoglobin A1C. It'll be 5.3, 5.3, 5.7 in that range.
Yeah.
But no medications.
So how about your weight? You lose weight. You lost weight at the beginning. What happened with your weight after that?
Yeah,
After that?
my weight went down to about, I went down from close to 200. I never, you know, I was never weighing myself before until this started. And I didn't actually get a scale until after I'd been on the diet for a couple of weeks. And then I started weighing myself daily. And my weight, I estimate my weight was probably close to 190. And it went down to 150 and then bounced up a little bit. So I hover around 160 now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to matter how much I eat or how much I exercise. It's always right around 160.
So a low-carb diet is not supposed to work long-term, is what some people claim. But for you?
Well, people say that you cannot stick to a lot of people say it's great in the short term, you can get good results, you can lose weight, etc., but nobody can stay on it, right? That's not true. You can stay on it. And it's easy to do. It gets easier over time. The longer you're on it, the easier it gets. And also, I think the longer you're on it, the less likely you are to relapse and start eating carbohydrates again. Now, if I eat something that's carbohydrate now, I feel crappy. It doesn't feel good. Yeah.
That's very impressive after 11 years. But you have some even more interesting stories to share. I know like you mentioned, you did some research on this. Can you talk about that?
Well, when I discovered I had diabetes, I was working in a job where I had responsibility for the health services for First Nations people over a big area, province of British Columbia. So a big area, lots of challenges, big staff, big operation. And the population that we were serving has a very high rate of diabetes. First Nations people have high rates of obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes. So I got interested in this because the diet I was eating, I began to connect the dots that this diet resembled their traditional diet. And this is on the west coast of Canada, where the traditional foods are seafoods, all kinds of seafoods and land mammals. They did not practice agriculture. They cultivated they did fish farming. They did clam beds and clam gardens and things like that, which is interesting. And they ate some wild foods from the plant, from wild plant foods from the forest. They ate berries, but it looked to me like their diet was mainly high fat, moderate protein, and not a lot of starch and sugar. And they had experienced a huge diet change over the recent decades and a huge increase in type 2 diabetes. So I started looking into that, and Steve Finney was somebody who helped me. We looked at some of the traditional foods, particularly ulican grease, which is a unique oil that they historically, for back beyond anyone's memory, the First Nations on the coast extract the oil from a little fish that they catch. It's the first fish that comes up in the rivers in the springtime, and they make it's a big deal. The whole village moves to the ulican grounds, and they spend a lot of time there catching the fish and rendering the oil from it. And we started exploring that, and what that did was it taught me the importance of fats in the diet. These people historically had eaten a very high-fat diet, a lot of marine fats, both that ulican grease and the marine mammals and the fatty fish like salmon and so on. And they were very healthy people. They had a very robust culture until diseases, from Europeans came and damaged things. But the remarkable thing was they transitioned from that high-fat, moderate protein diet to a very poor diet, of highly refined carbohydrate foods, starchy, sugary foods, a lot of sugar, pop and chips and terrible foods.
And what's happened?
Their health, obesity and diabetes became very common. They had a very high prevalence of diabetes. So I got interested in that, and I approached a small First Nations on a little island, and I said to them, maybe if you went back to your traditional diet, we could fix these problems. These problems seem to be linked to that change in diet. And of course, it's hard to go back completely to a traditional diet. Not everybody wants to. Even if they do, they may not get all the traditional foods. So we said, well, you can add market foods, but they can't have starch or sugar in them. So they ate a traditional diet, they ate all their traditional foods, but they added pork and chicken and butter and cream and non-starchy vegetables like cauliflower and broccoli and leafy greens and so on, which weren't technically traditional foods, but conformed to the macronutrient composition of their original diet. And of course they got better, you know.
And you were doing a TV documentary about this project, right?
The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation got interested in this, and they had a crew that followed me around for a year when we were doing this research and did a documentary, 1-hour documentary on it. Yeah.
What's it called?
It was called My Big Fat Diet. And it was broadcast in Canada several times nationally, but I don't think it ever got broadcast anywhere else. If it did, I'm not aware of that. It was very popular in Canada.
Can you get to see it somewhere?
Well, I shouldn't tell you this because the producers don't like it, but I think you could see it on YouTube.
Oh, well, pretend you didn't say that. I mean, I've seen that
Yes.
documentary. It's really, really interesting. Can you tell some of the stories of the people who participated in this experiment, taking out the sugar and the starch from the diet and replacing it with more of the foods that their ancestors ate?
It was a real study. It was a university-based study. So we had recruited about 100 people out of this small community into the study. But the documentary, you know, the crew that made the documentary had to select a few people, and that's what they did. I think they chose about 5 people and just followed them throughout the course of the study. And fortunately, I guess for me, they all did pretty well. You know, they lost a lot of weight. People got off their medications for blood pressure and blood sugar and heartburn. People get off their heartburn medications and did quite well. Some people lost 60 pounds or more in the documentary. One fellow had coronary artery surgery during this time, and he stayed on the diet. He was encouraged to stay on the diet by his cardiologist, and he did quite well. He shrunk, his waist size shrunk significantly, and he was doing very well. There was one old fellow that wasn't in the documentary. It's too bad he wasn't, because he was such a great story. He was retired. He was in his 70s. He had diabetes. He didn't really have a life. He watched TV, wasn't very active. And he lost over 50 pounds and got off all his medications. And he said he had so much energy that he couldn't stay at home anymore. And he went back to work as a carpenter and did heavy, you know, manual work as a carpenter because he felt so much better. There was a lot of stories like that that weren't part of the documentary, but were good stories.
It's very impressive, you know.
Yeah.
Lots of people regaining their health and losing weight. So what kind of reactions do you get from this? I mean, you would think that more people would like to try this, and perhaps some more researchers would like to, you know, it's not the advice that people are usually given these days.
One of the things that I find really puzzling about this is I've talked to senior people in the American Diabetes Association, for instance, or the Canadian Diabetes Association and other big organizations. And I can show them, I do a lot of lectures, and I've got, you know, slides that show people's progress. They start off here overweight, using insulin, not controlling, and then a few weeks later they've lost weight, they're off their insulin, their blood sugars are normal, their blood pressures are normal, and there's a complete turnaround. And people look at that and they shrug their shoulders and they say, yeah, of course somebody can do that, but nobody can stick to it. And yeah, if you want to impress somebody, you need to have a big study, you know, thousands of people doing that. And I say to them, well, you know, if I did that with a drug, I would be a wealthy man. You would be all over me for that. You know, if it was a molecule that made that difference. But it's a simple dietary change, and nobody wants to hear about it. It just seems very odd to me.
Why? Why do you think? Why not? Why is nobody interested in that?
That's a very hard question to answer. I think there's a multiple answer to that question. I think a lot of people are in organizations and positions that are funded by the drug industry. And the drug industry doesn't want people doing this. they get off the drugs. There's no
Bad for business.
Yeah, it's bad for business. Totally bad for business. And these big organizations depend on drug company funding. That's how they get their. That's how they run.
How about government funding?
Well, you know, government. I worked in government, and government doesn't get directly involved in those kinds of things, in setting those. They leave that stuff to the scientific organizations. They don't really get much direct government funding. So I don't think government wants to step in and displace the drug company funding.
So it's going to take a long time for this to...
Well, you see, the other problem is that there's nothing to patent there. There's nobody who's going to get wealthy from patenting this. And that our system runs on something that can be patented and marketed and turn a profit, and that's how the funding flows through the system in terms of both the research agenda and also how recommendations are generated. And there's nothing there to patent.
But it's all free information, right?
It's freely available.
So
freely
people
available.
who are looking at this and curious, what should they do? Where can they find more information about this?
I have a good recommendation for a website they can look at. DietDoctor.com.
Oh, yeah.
Listen,
yeah. Well, I know that one.
You know, I send people to your website because you do have a very concise description of how to follow the diet there. And I often send people to your website.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And
so that could be a place to start. Something else?
It's a good place.
DietDoctor.com, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's lots of books. The Atkins book, especially the new one by Jeff Volek and Steve Finney and Eric Westman is a good book. And then Jeff and Steve wrote their own book, The Art and Science of Low Carb Living. I think that's a very good book for people to read.
You have a website too. You blog sometimes, at least. You know, not every day, but
I have
sometimes.
A very dysfunctional blog right now. I neglect it, and I'm having technical problems, but I'm going to get it running again. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe when people see this, where is it?
drjwortman.com.
drjwortman.
Yeah, DRJAYWORTMAN.com.
Yeah, so lots of different options for people who want to try this. I think, I mean, like you said, it's kind of depressing that it's not picked up more by big organizations yet.
Yes.
Do you see any change coming?
I lecture to doctors. I do lectures a few times a year to doctors. And my sense is the physicians that are working at the front lines, at the coalface, understand that there's a lack of effectiveness in the tools that they've been given. Because I'll lecture in, for instance, a diabetes course, where every other lecture tells them the conventional approach. And then I come along and tell them, do everything completely different. And these are the results you can get. And they respond very positively to that. I think there's a recognition out there that the conventional approach is failing us and that they do need something different. The problem is, how do they do this in practice? Like, how do they take, these people work in very business, in business-like environments that are very busy, and they have to be up to date on a whole range of diseases and therapies, and how do they fit this new thing into their practice in a way that makes sense and pays the bills? That's the challenge.
So it's a challenge, huh?
It is a challenge.
But it can be done, I'm sure.
I think it can be done. I think it's going to have to be done. I don't think the conventional approach is going to be sustainable. It first of all doesn't work very well. Secondly, it gets very costly, and I think the system will buckle under the weight of that cost. Yeah.
Yeah. So people who want to try this out, you gave us quite a few recommendations. I'm going to put them below this video in the information section for anyone who want to check them out. So thank you so much for doing this interview.
You're welcome.
And I'm sure a lot of people are going to walk in your footsteps.
Good.
Hopefully.
Good.